Why would MotoGP, home of 360 km/h beasts and billion-dollar engineering, decide to shrink its engines to 850 cubic centimeters? It sounds like Formula One swapping out supercars for scooters. But this isn't about going slower. It's about saving the soul of the sport before it burns out. It wasn't that long ago when MotoGP bikes started regularly smashing through the 350 km/h mark. And instead of slowing down, engineers grinned and said, "Let's take it to 360." And they did. Over the past decade, MotoGP turned into an engineering arms race with one goal: more speed, faster laps, bigger numbers. Ducati led the charge. Then KTM followed, and even the underdogs had to throw everything at the wind tunnel to stay afloat. But somewhere along the way, the sport started feeling less like a battle of riders and more like a tech showcase on two wheels. The spectacle was still there, but it was changing fast, and not always for the better. While fans at home were glued to top-speed graphics and hearing commentators shout about straight-line power, the actual racing started tightening in the worst way. Overtaking became harder. Slipstreams became useless. Dirty air from aero wings made it feel like tailing another rider meant dancing on the edge of disaster. And with cornering speeds climbing, every crash carried consequences nobody wanted to see. Yes, the bikes were more capable than ever, but the sport was edging toward a cliff where one bad moment at 360 km/h could reshape an entire season, or worse. That's when the conversation started shifting. Not just about who's fastest, but whether this level of speed was still sustainable, exciting, or even safe. MotoGP, the fastest motorcycle series on Earth, had become too fast for its own good. And for the first time, it wasn't just fans questioning it. Riders, teams, and rule makers began looking at the 1,000cc beasts and wondering, have we gone too far? And more importantly, what comes next if we have? By the time factory teams were squeezing over 300 horsepower from 1,000cc machines, it wasn't just about building fast bikes anymore. It was about building fast bikes with money. Lots of it. The top-tier teams were spending like Formula One operations, pouring millions into advanced electronics, rare materials, and aerodynamic testing rigs that looked like they belonged in a wind tunnel lab, not a motorcycle garage. And while that created some awe-inspiring machines, it also created an unspoken caste system on the grid. Factory-backed riders got cutting-edge hardware. Everyone else got last year's leftovers, or worse, a mid-season parts bin special. No matter how talented the satellite rider, if your team didn't have a blank check from Bologna or Tokyo, you were chasing ghosts. This performance gap didn't just show up on the stopwatch. It showed up in the standings, week after week. Sure, you'd get the occasional satellite miracle, Martin winning on a Ducati, for example, but those moments were the exception, not the norm. And even then, those satellite successes usually came on bikes that were almost full factory spec. The arms race in MotoGP left little room for underdogs. The series began rewarding technical superiority more than rider genius, and suddenly, it felt like only 5 or 6 bikes had a real shot at a podium on any given Sunday. That's not what fans signed up for. They came for dogfights and drama, not time trials with logos. So when the idea of reducing displacement to 850cc surfaced, it wasn't just about slowing down, it was a lever to rebalance the field, rein in runaway costs, and make sure every rider on that grid had a fairer shot at glory. Moving forward, though, it wasn't just cost or competitiveness steering the ship. There was a bigger, greener elephant in the paddock. MotoGP isn't just fighting for podiums anymore, it's fighting for relevance in a world where burning fuel for fun is starting to look like a guilty pleasure. Let's be real, if you're running a sport built on internal combustion and the rest of the planet is trying to cut emissions, people are going to start asking questions. And those questions aren't just coming from politicians or climate activists, they're coming from sponsors, investors, and even younger fans who've grown up hearing about the climate crisis in school. So yeah, when Dorna and the FIM announced that MotoGP would switch to 100% non-fossil fuels by 2027, it wasn't just a nice PR move, it was survival mode. Dropping to 850cc fits right into that picture, smaller engines burn less fuel. They force manufacturers to get smarter with combustion, not just bigger with displacement. And with biofuels, synthetic fuels, and all these experimental blends starting to show real promise, the timing makes sense. MotoGP wants to prove that you can still have heart-pounding, edge-of-your-seat racing without torching the planet in the process. That's a message they want to send not just to fans, but to the industry watching from the sidelines. And if it works, the tech could trickle down into road bikes, helping average riders burn cleaner without losing the thrill. But don't mistake this for some soft, green-washed version of the sport. These bikes will still hit 330 kilometers per hour. They'll still scream down straights and brake like demons. The only difference is they'll do it with a little more responsibility and a little less fuel. Because in 2027, if you want to stay fast, you'd better learn how to be smart. And safer too, because that's another reason the rulebook is getting a rewrite. The thing about speed is that it doesn't just thrill, it threatens. And over the last few seasons, MotoGP has been brushing up against that line more often than anyone's comfortable admitting. Riders crashing at 300 plus kilometers an hour isn't a hypothetical anymore. It's happening. High-speed accidents have become more frequent. And while the gear, airbags, and runoff zones are better than ever, physics still has the final say. Ask anyone who saw that terrifying 2020 Red Bull Ring crash when Morbidelli and Zarco's bikes turned into high-velocity missiles flying across the track, and they'll tell you straight, we're lucky nobody died. That moment shook the paddock, and it wasn't an isolated scare. The current bikes are monsters. They're so fast, so stable, and so aggressively tuned that even the smallest mistake can spiral into catastrophe. And when you factor in the insane acceleration and braking forces involved, it's no wonder riders have started sounding the alarm. Not because they're afraid, these are still gladiators, but because they know when a machine is pushing the limits of human reaction time. A crash at 330 kilometers per hour is brutal. A crash at 360, that's a physics problem no amount of bravery or protective gear can solve. It's not about nerfing the sport or wrapping it in bubble wrap. It's about making sure the edge these riders live on doesn't become a cliff they fall off. So when people ask why shrink the engines, this is part of the answer too. Reducing top speeds by even 20 or 30 kilometers per hour doesn't kill the thrill. It buys everyone a little more breathing room. And in a sport where milliseconds matter, a little more room can mean the difference between walking away and getting stretchered off. But even beyond safety, there's another force reshaping MotoGP. And this time, it's coming from the fans themselves. Fans used to go wild for top speed records, sure, but lately, the energy's shifted. People don't just want to see who's fastest. They want to see who's fighting, elbows out, brakes smoking, last corner lunges kind of racing. And if you look at the data, it backs that up. Surveys from Nielsen Sports in 2022 and 2023 showed that fans were more engaged during Moto2 and Moto3 races than some of the Premier Class events. Why? Because those races are tighter, messier, and more unpredictable. There's less technical dominance and more human drama. It's a knife fight instead of a chess match. And that's what people are showing up for now. MotoGP knows it can't just coast on heritage. It has to entertain. And part of that means figuring out how to bring the action back to the front. Right now, some races feel like a procession. You get your front runner, maybe a few mid-pack scraps, and then silence. When straight line speed and aero make passing nearly impossible, all that beautiful aggression riders have gets stuck behind a wall of turbulent air. Fans don't care how many kilowatts your rear wing produces if the guy behind you can't even get close enough to try a move. So cutting displacement to 850cc is MotoGP's way of saying, let's put the fight back into the sport. Less power means more emphasis on throttle control, corner speed, braking finesse, the things that separate the good from the great. It's not about dumbing down the racing. It's about stripping away the excess and letting raw rider talent shine again. Because at the end of the day, fans aren't showing up to admire engineering diagrams. They're showing up to watch warriors go to war on two wheels. And this rule change just might give them more of that. Now, for anyone thinking, wait a second, didn't MotoGP already try smaller engines before? Yep. Back in 2007, the sport dropped from the 990cc Screamers to 800cc bikes, hoping it would make the racing safer and more dynamic. Spoiler, it didn't quite go as planned. Cornering speeds went up, overtaking got harder, and the bikes lost some of that raw edge that made them feel like untamed beasts. By 2012, the series was back up to 1000cc, basically admitting the experiment was a bust. So why would it work this time? Because the entire rulebook is getting rewritten. This isn't just about engine size. It's about limiting the tools that allowed teams to gain back every bit of speed they lost. In 2007, they dropped the displacement but didn't touch electronics, aero, or fuel limits, so the engineers just turned up the tech dial and nullified the change. In 2027, they're doing it all at once. Ride height devices? Gone. Holeshot systems? Banned. Fuel tanks get trimmed from 22 liters to 20, meaning teams can't just run the smaller engines at full blast. And aero regulations are getting tighter too, cutting down the winglet madness that's made modern bikes look like fighter jets with wheels. So yeah, it might sound like history repeating itself, but it's not. This time, they're closing all the escape hatches. No one's going to be able to develop around the rules. Every team will have to make hard choices. Do you chase straight line power or corner speed? Do you optimize for acceleration or fuel conservation? That kind of tension breeds creativity. And more importantly, it levels the playing field in a way that 2007 never really did. This isn't a downgrade. It's a reboot. And it's not just the engineers being tested, it's the whole grid. MotoGP isn't just rewriting its rulebook, it's trying to reboot its soul. The shift to 850cc engines isn't a random technical tweak. It's a response to a sport that's outpaced itself, financially, environmentally, and competitively. Like Formula One's 2022 overhaul, this isn't about slowing down, it's about bringing the fight back to the grid. The new rules promise closer racing, tighter margins, and a spotlight that shifts back to rider skill, not just the depth of a team's pockets. With smaller engines, stricter fuel limits, and tech restrictions across the board, MotoGP hopes to open the door to new manufacturers, new fans, and a new kind of race weekend, one that feels raw, unpredictable, and human again. This isn't guaranteed to work. There will be growing pains, resistance, and maybe even a few broken dynasties. But the goal is clear. Save the racing by scaling it back just enough to make it brilliant again. Whether it sparks a new golden era or just stirs the pot depends on how the teams, riders, and fans respond. If you're as curious as we are about what MotoGP looks like when it's built for chaos, courage, and pure rider genius, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop your take in the comments. This story's just getting started.